So I'm a professor of design at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the eastern half of the United States. And I've been teaching 42 years, and I primarily teach in the communication design area. I've been at Carnegie Mellon for 30 years and have been teaching courses in typography, information design, interaction design, and an area that I guess I could say I have a great interest and specialty in is in time-based communication. I've taught courses, I've run workshops, I've done a little bit of writing about it, but primarily I really see the work progressing over the last 15 years in the classroom. It's really the students' work and our discussions and our critiques together that move this forward. I would say that this workshop had its start 2 years ago. Well, actually more than that, 3 years ago, when I first met Eva Satelechka. She emailed me and asked if she might visit Carnegie Mellon University when she visited the U.S. She was going to be on the East Coast visiting some colleagues, and I said, of course, come to Pittsburgh. And so she came and spent a few days. She visited my classes. She gave a couple of lectures. I took her to see falling water, which I always enjoy seeing, and I think she enjoyed also. And we kept up a correspondence. And at one point she said, would you be interested in coming to Poland in the summer to teach a workshop? And why not make it a workshop in kinetic typography? I love the idea. She said the location is wonderful. It's in the south of Poland, in fact on the Czech border, and which is actually where we're standing. That's the Czech Republic, and that's Poland. And the location is an old castle. And it's a perfect place for a workshop, any workshop, because it affords you space, quietness, a town that you can walk to for food, entertainment, a change of pace. But it really does afford us all, the participants, the teachers, a chance to work and share ideas and have conversations, have meals together, have some beer together. And so I came 2 years ago around this time, in late June, early July, and did a one-week workshop. And it was great fun. The results were fantastic. And about a year ago, Eva emailed me and said, would you like to do another workshop? And to make a long story short, I agreed, and we were going to make it 2 weeks this time, and it would be on information design. And my suggestion was maybe it would be interesting for the participants to focus on both print and digital solutions to information design, because this is really such a need right now in the profession, but really in life in general. We need information given to us, we need to make it available, and it can't always be printed. So that's what we're doing now. We're actually coming to the close of the 2 weeks, which has gone by much too quickly, but that's usually a good sign. The workshop has gone, I think, extremely well. There are 12 participants, with 2 people shifting in between the weeks. The first week we spent focused on print information design, and the second week we focused on time-based information design. And I have been so impressed with the participants and how hard they've worked, how they've stayed late at night to do work, to move their projects forward. And I think the results are very, very impressive. Just this afternoon or this morning, they brought in the posters and hung them up, and everybody was excited to see what they look like. They look very good. And So I would say that the time was well spent. The results, I think, are good. And I think best of all, everybody learned something from this experience. I can't remember my first book, but I can say that books played a very important part in my childhood. I'm sure that somebody read to me when I was very young, and when I learned to read, I just kept reading. And I remember reading books that were available at home or reading books that were in the library. I remember in early high school, my father had a collection of Agatha Christie mystery novels, and I devoured them in 1 year. I just kept bringing them to school and read them in between classes, probably even during class. But I loved reading. I also loved looking at books, even though I didn't realize that there was somebody behind the design of books. But early on, I liked looking at books. The layout of the books, the use of imagery, whether they were drawings or illustrations or photographs. And it was only in college when I was introduced to some very dynamically designed, dynamically thought of, conceptualized books that I realized that somebody was behind the concept behind the book and someone was behind the layout of the book. And that pretty much sealed my fate, because that's kind of where I wanted to go with this. So yes, books played a big role in my childhood and onward, and I continue to enjoy looking at and reading and designing books. I would say that ebooks, and maybe we need to move beyond just ebooks, but let's say the tablet. Content on a tablet or ebooks, I think will play a pretty large role in education. I mean, already there are a number of schools, I would say around the world, but certainly I can point to some in the United States, that are giving their students iPads or something like an iPad and allowing the students to simply download the content. So it could be a geography book, it could be a history book, it could be a science book. And that's a very, very interesting idea for a number of reasons. Expense might be one reason. I think more important is the ability to update content and the ability of the student to, while reading, make connections to other content beyond that book itself, beyond that content itself. One important point is that when you have digital data and you are accessing it, you are reading it, you have also the chance to link to other data that resides somewhere in the internet, in the cloud, whatever you want to call it. That's a very powerful and a really important point, because you're not bound literally by the pages within a cover of a book. You are actually freed to access content wherever it's available, available by a click, by a swipe, by a tap. I have an iPad. I got it about a year ago, and I do read content, primarily a magazine or two. I actually have not read a book on the iPad. I still actually prefer reading it, reading the actual book. I'm moving a little bit beyond the question. My wife has an iPad and got it before I did, and loves reading books on the iPad for the reasons that I stated a little bit earlier: convenience, ease of downloading, ease of storage, lightness of the artifact. I To be honest, I don't spend a huge amount of time on my iPad. I use it to browse a little bit and see what things are being done, but I still like to write by longhand, pen or pencil on paper, and I like to read books, and I'll occasionally read, like I said, a magazine on the iPad. Well, I've always been interested in new things. I've always been interested in new technologies. And I don't just mean computers. You know, when I was growing up, my father had a tape recorder, a reel-to-reel tape recorder that I liked to play with and mess around with. So I find that bringing ideas that challenge students who are definitely younger than I is a way that I maintain my curiosity, is a way that I continue to explore. And if I find students who are equally curious about things in the future, about things unknown, many of them related to design, of course, that excites me greatly. And so it may seem like a contradiction, but I don't really see it as a contradiction. I see it as a way that allows me to continue growing, to continue searching, to continue exploring, oftentimes with students, and sometimes on my own. But I also find that students are braver than I. They're braver with the technology, and they'll just mess around. And I sometimes are rather cautious and not wanting to mess up the software or mess up what I've done. So no, I don't see it as a contradiction. I like that existence that in a way has one foot, if you will, in one age and another foot in another age. Digital books have challenged, certainly, traditional books, printed books. But I think in a way the challenge is going to make printed books maybe even better, and digital books also even better. What needs to be done, and this is happening in different ways, I think that in the end, physical books and digital books will be better because of this confrontation, if you will. The technologies that are affording the creation of ebooks and maybe even new experiences that go beyond being called a book will help redefine what content is and how it lives in digital media. Because at the moment, e-readers, which are, I was going to say simply, but which are a representation of a printed book, like a novel, is a fairly straightforward affair. There is great convenience in being able to download a book and read it wherever without the weight of the book. But at the same time, I think that what we currently call a book and the experience of reading a book may be redefined as more open thinkers, more adventurous thinkers approach giving form to content on a screen. Whatever the screen is, whatever size the screen is, hopefully it will begin moving away from what we call a traditional book and really taking advantage of the technology and the capabilities of the technology in ways that make us appreciate this new technology and make us also appreciate physical books for what they offer. If you look at the history of design as a field, you realize that it's quite broad. There are areas related to printing, to the graphic design area, but then there's also a larger, if you will, a larger umbrella of communication design that encompasses not just the physical artifact that is printed, but spatial design, information in spaces, information on screens, small and big. There's industrial design. There are facets of design that are moving in their own directions. But if there's something common to many of them in the first decade, if you will, of the 21st century, it is a realization that the huge role, the massive role that design plays in society, in culture, needs to be taken even more seriously. That our job is not just creating artifacts, and in some cases artifacts that are used and then thrown away, but even questioning the existence of some of these artifacts, certainly questioning the creation process of some of these artifacts. Are they responsibly decided on? What do we do with them when we're not using them anymore, when we're finished with them? Unlike books, for example, where we want to keep them in our library, there are many other artifacts that we use, consume, and throw away. We know very, very clearly that pollution from these artifacts is inundating this earth, this globe, this planet, and we need to be more responsible in what we do and how we design. And I think that if we partner with governments and institutions and even companies, yes, even companies whose primary purpose is to create a product, sell it, and make money, if we can partner with them to make responsible decisions, I think the planet will be better off in the end. So I don't see a death to, say, graphic design in the same way I don't see death to a book. I think books in one form or another will continue to exist, even in their physical form. But I do see a change in thinking and a change in attitude, because that's where real change begins. You have to change your mindset, and you have to change the mindset of your students if you are a teacher, and you have to change the mindset of your partners, your clients, because even though, yes, one person can do a lot, many people can do a lot more. So I'm hopeful. It's not going to be easy, because I know that there are those who believe this isn't the role of design, but I believe that it is. And many of my colleagues at my school and in my department feel the same way. And I know that there are people in other schools and other departments with similar points of view. And I think that the next 10 years, the next 20 years is going to produce enormous change in our attitude about design, and even in the way we educate future designers. I think that there is a new designer that's emerging in graphic design, and that knowledge about areas like typography and composition and color, posters, books, film titles, websites, because technology is playing an enormous role these days, these years, in design and in our lives. I think that's the more important thing. It is incumbent on schools to teach future designers as much about technology as they do about design. And by that I mean learning some programming, and different schools or different teachers may have favorite programs to teach, but learning how to communicate directly with the computer as opposed to relying solely on software. We will always use software, there's no doubt about that. But at the same time, when you have the ability to write code that speaks directly to the computer, you might be able to achieve, you often can achieve, more than what software allows you to do. So that's one big change. The other is when you use software creatively, not as a tool to execute something that you've imagined in your mind's eye, but as a partner in a way to explore, then it becomes exciting because in a way you are inventing new form, new solutions with the technology, as opposed to saying, I will get an idea in my head, sketch it out on paper, and then I'll execute it on the screen with software. That will continue to be done, but that cannot continue to be the primary way that we design in the future. So somebody who is adept visually, conceptually, and technologically, I believe is beginning to point to the future shape of the graphic designer. And I would say that no one obviously can predict the future, but we can point to certain things, certain trends. We can also look backwards at history, because oftentimes history may help us understand what's coming next. And I think that it is going to take people in fields beyond writing and beyond design and beyond publishing to actually define what the next iteration of the book, and I use that between quotes, on these digital devices will be like. Because these devices provide opportunities far more powerful, if you will, and far more varied than what one normally gets in a book. And I'm not downplaying the experience of reading a book, reading a good book, or looking at a really good book. But I think, or I have a hunch that it's going to take more than designers and writers and publishers, and it'll take artists and filmmakers and choreographers and technologists and programmers, dreamers, brave sailors who are not afraid to move and try things so different and so maybe in some cases outlandish, where we'll begin to see some idea of what the next generation, if you will, or the next iteration, or the next version of what we call a book, what that might be like. And in a way, I hope we don't call them books anymore, because for many, the term book means something quite specific, and it's not just the object, but the feeling that one gets when one talks about a book or one even interacts with a book. And I hope that we come up with other terms for this new thing, or this new experience that emerges. I'm excited by it, I'm hopeful, and every so often in my classes I will see glimmers of possible answers from things that my students do. And I believe that it'll be them. It's the students of today who will create this next iteration of what we call a book.